So hi everyone, welcome to our panel on developing the next generation of leaders, a topic that I'm particularly excited about. We have decision makers and HR leaders with us on this track today, but also a lot of talented women, obviously. So we want to use our time wisely to discuss what future, but also existing female leaders need to thrive in the workplace, and also what you can do as an organization to ensure gender diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm really honored to be a moderator for the session. As you know, I'm Madis, one of the co-founders of the Female Factor, and we work with a lot of organizations on a daily basis at the Female Factor exactly around this topic. So that's why I'm very curious to hear some insights from the three incredible women I have with me now. And the interesting thing is that with Eve, the CTO of a multinational tech company, Forge Rock, we kind of get a good organizational point of view from a tech company's perspective. Roquita is a known keynote speaker and advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Habits at Work. So I also love to hear your point of view. And then we also have the perspective of a leadership coach, Gabby, from Bunch. But I think I'll just let you ladies introduce yourselves and tell us about, where you are right now and how you develop the next generation of leaders.
Great. Would you like me to go first then?
Yes, please.
All right. Well, it's just great to be with you, Madis, and everybody. I'm just so excited to be here at this event. I'm Eve Mailer. I head up the innovation labs at Forge Rock. We're a platform for digital identity. I love our mission. Our mission is to help people safely and simply access the connected world. We're connecting right here digitally. We do digital identity for consumers, workforce users, also things like smart things, for example. We probably all use those. And it's a uniquely rich and comprehensive and extensible platform. So we're helping our enterprise customers kind of achieve no compromises security and user experience in that equation. And I've been doing identity and security and privacy for really more than 20 years. And I've been doing technology and technology standards for more than 30 years. So I've founded a number of standards, some of which technology folks in the audience may have heard of. User Managed Access, UMA, SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language. If you've ever done single sign-on in a work context or maybe in a home context, you might have heard of SAML. Also XML, technology people might have heard of that. So if my career and my employers have any theme, it's to connect, to protect, and to respect. That's me.
Beautiful. Thank you for the intro, Eve. Roquita, do you want to go next?
Yeah, first off, good morning, good afternoon, based on where you are in the world, and know that we have over a dozen countries represented. So wherever you are, happy day. I am Roquita Coleman-Williams. I started my career, 25 years ago, working for UPS. In fact, I've managed over the last 20 years teams of as many as 300 sellers, and I've done that in a very male-dominated industry. In 2019, I gave a TED Talk about what it looked like for me as a 135-pound, over 40-year-old woman to learn to conduct trains as a part of my commitment to our business and to unlocking value for customers. But also I needed a personal experience around what it really meant to do that frontline work. That experience had an unintended outcome for me. And that unintended outcome was I no longer wanted to be limited to just managing sales teams. I knew that I had to level up and be a part of the progress that we are trying to make, especially around DEI. And that's what makes it so exciting what I do today with Habits at Work. I think the highest call of a seller and a sales leader is to help people make progress in their lives. That's what it means to truly unlock value. And we can't do that. We can't truly make progress in our own lives or help other people do it until we understand what habits we need to have an inclusive culture, what habits truly bring DEI to life. And so I get a chance to work with some companies like Google and some of the other high-tech companies that are really committed to this work. And it's absolutely love it. I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you so much for being with us. Also, our team can post your TED Talk in the chat if anyone wants to watch afterwards. Gabby, tell us about yourself.
Yes, I'm so honored to be with all of you today. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Gabby. I am the leadership coach at Bunch, where we are very focused on development of leaders because we are building an AI leadership coach. So a lot of what I do is logical knowledge behind the coach, making sure that it's actually a enduring and compelling experience to everyone who is using the platform. And one thing that I'm really passionate about is making sure that leadership extends to a broader group of people, because leadership is a mindset and a set of behaviors. It is not all about a title. So I would love to dig into that a little bit more today. And just a little bit more about me. My background is in organizational behavior. I studied at LSE in London, and my expertise is in trust and remote teams. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Trust in remote teams, such a relevant topic. As in every session, I've prepared some questions in advance that I really want to ask you, but as always, the Q&A section is here, and everyone watching right now, you can just type in your questions and we will do the Q&A session at the end in the last 15 minutes. So both Gabby and Roquita, you touched upon it just briefly. And Roquita, I watched your TED Talk and you said the same thing. You said you don't need to have a title to lead. And in Gabby, you mentioned that it's really about a mindset. So what characteristics do you look for when you hire or develop the next generation of leaders?
I think one of the first things, and I have a personal experience with this that's pretty recent, that brings this to life for me. I think one of the greatest things that we can do for ourselves and for our people are work on building out our inner selves such that we're not triggered by giving and receiving feedback. So when I came from a very male-dominated industry. There was no 360 feedback. You work 20 years to get to a space. And by the time you reach the vice president level, you're there because, gosh, you've earned the right to be. You've taken enough crap. I'm here now. No, I do not want your feedback. And that's the attitude I came into consulting work with. And one of the members of my team, a woman who happened to be a year or two older than my son, gave me some really critical feedback. And I was triggered. I mean, immediately, like very triggered. I was like, I've spent 20 years doing this so that I don't have to look at myself honestly, so that my title speaks for me. And when she gave me that feedback, I thought, if at 24, 25, I had the courage and the audacity to go to a senior member of my team and give them critical feedback on how they were showing up, who would I be now today? Who would I have become if that had been the culture that I lived and worked in? And so I think from an organizational perspective, creating culture where you give and receive feedback is extremely important. As a leader, working on your inner self so that you give and receive feedback without trigger is probably one of the most imperative things that you have to do as a leader.
I love that. I love that so much. It's so important. We've been talking about that a lot and working on that as well. And it takes a lot of skill.
It takes a lot of courage.
Yes.
At the end of the day, we're showing up saying, I want you to hold me accountable for being who I say I am, no matter where you are in the organization, no matter what your responsibilities are, no matter your title. And that's a big ask from someone to give that. And it's an even bigger ask for the person who says, I'm an open book.
Yeah.
Challenge me to be who I'm going to be.
It's saying, I don't want to be told I'm right. I want to get to the right answer, which means you got to accept correctives, right? I mean, if I'm designing a protocol, which I've done many times, it's no fun to design a protocol that isn't adopted. It's much more fun to design a protocol that's successful in the marketplace.
Exactly. And you need a culture in which you're having that feedback to do that and to develop that and develop something that works for and has its desired impact.
That's right. To be successful in business, to have a product market fit, you need feedback. You need feedback from the market, which internally you need to do that much more often. And it does require courage. Absolutely.
I think that, so what's happened organizationally is that there was a time when organizations expected people to do their transformations at home. Like, I'm here to give you a job. There's a role of responsibility, and as a result, I compense you for that. Transform and make progress and grow into your whole self or spiritual self or whoever you want to be. Do that at home and then come let me benefit from that. I think now employers are getting the sense that work is an instrument of that progress, that we're all living, breathing beings, and work is how we're expressing ourselves. So we're really wanting our organizations to be more than passive participants in it. We're wanting our organizations to give us the tools to truly transform. So we can't really allow people anymore to just say, oh, here are the habits that you need to activate. Here are some tools that you can go engage. We have to own that. We have to own the process of helping people to do that transformational work.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an analog to digital transformation that all these organizations are trying to undergo. Note to self.
That's something to think about.
I think I will.
Yeah. I think
all
of this
on it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say a lot of what you're speaking about, especially when it relates to habits, I think is super important. We all have organizational habits. We all have our own habits. But I think, Modest, back to your question, when I think about like hiring people and bringing people into the organization, one of the habits or competencies I look for is a soft one, which is, are they a lifelong learner? Are they the type of person who's curious and who is adaptable and asking the right questions? Because it's not always about going straight to the solution. It's asking why. Why are we seeing that onto the underlying symptoms? So I really look for growth mindset in people whenever I'm doing interviews. And I think that especially when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not always about their experience black and white on paper. It's rather about the potential that they have and how are they building and growing and how are they learning from their failures, because we're all going to fail at some point. So how do you pick yourself back up and how do you stay in that curious space?
That's a very good point. That's a very good point that you just mentioned, to hire for potential and not specifically maybe the background that someone has. But how do you find that potential, especially now hiring remotely? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think there's two things on the person level and the organization level. But one thing, just as an organization, I'm sure we'll get into this more later, is in your job descriptions, you don't need to have long requirements anymore, because you're already funneling out a lot of people who might kind of second guess themselves. And when hiring for potential, I do really believe in behavioral interviewing. So for example, doing like case studies and seeing what questions is this person using? How are they breaking down this problem? Because that tells you a lot more about their working style and how they think and how they can perform in the future, as opposed to maybe something that they're trying so hard to tailor something they did to your context and it's not a perfect match, and that can be quite a awkward experience in interviews. So I believe in doing case studies and doing a lot of behavioral interviewing.
I like what Gabriella says about behavioral interviewing, because it's something that is very challenging, especially for sales people who are wanting to transition into leadership. When you've been in those very tactical roles like that, you can't be judged on your capacity to lead based on performance. And in fact, we find that some of the people who show up with the best leadership potential haven't been the top stars, right? They haven't been the ones who were the top 10% producers. And using productivity as a measurement of leadership capacity is something that's a bit outdated. So I think, to Gabriella's point, behavioral interviewing and making sure that these organizations have the tools to do that is a much better way to assure that greater than 75% of leadership sales leaders aren't male. That's the way we have equity in that particular role, especially in sales organizations.
Super interesting point. And that actually leads me to my next question, because especially when it comes to, building up the pipeline of female leaders, it is often said that it is a pipeline problem of not enough women coming from those, backgrounds that are necessary. So if, for example, you are the CTO of Ford Rock, so studies show that actually in the US, only 16% of CTOs are women. Now, do you need to, be a graduate from, I don't know, a STEM background, or how can you make it without it? Like, what's your take there?
Well, I suppose I'm living proof. I mean, I studied linguistics and not computational.
Oh, wow.
Back in the day, I mean, it was sort of, and I didn't study dead languages or anything either. But I didn't study a technological field. I sort of absorbed my tech in the doing. And this is a very live conversation in the fields that I'm in. There's a very nice conference series called EWF, Executive Women's Forum on Information Security, Risk Management, and Privacy, where there's a lot of
title.
That's why it's known as EWF. But it's full of female CIOs, CISOs, chief privacy officers, a lot of whom have come up through non-technological disciplines, not everybody, but some. And, a lot of folks will talk about how, they've been encouraged by mentors to consider a new path. An awful lot about, for example, security is operational and communicating with a board about non-technical risks, just for example, things like brand risk in a breach. These are things that really happen. And, there's an awful lot about that is not just having to understand, for example, cryptography. Not every security person or somebody with a CISSP credential. I don't have a CISSP, which is the thing that you can get to say you know security. You don't have to know deep cryptography to go off and, do all of that. So it's quite possible that, all the disciplines that you need to do a great job at that are not deeply technical. It's really valuable to do all those operational things. And as I think we know now in the world of IT, some people will argue that it should be called business technology, and it has at times been called BT, because the business value of those things, the consultative nature of it, is absolutely a business discipline, and the value to the business needs to be reflected. So it's quite possible. I'm here to tell you.
I love that you're proof that it's possible. That's beautiful. Now, when you transitioned into a leadership role, and that's a question obviously for all of you, what's one thing you wished you'd known? What's really a mistake that you maybe made?
I don't know if I will tell you.
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if it was a mistake I made, but I wish I'd known more financial stuff becoming a leader. Definitely valuable.
There are two areas that I certainly wish I'd have known. One, I wish I would have known that leadership requires an investment of my time to get into a leadership role, right? I was very focused on performance and building performance currency. And I think I worked too hard, too long building performance currency and didn't switch to investing in building leadership competencies soon enough. I would say today, if I had to do over again, about year 15 of proving myself would have been it. Like I would have flipped the switch and start working on strategy and critical thinking and decision-making processes and really carving out real time to develop that. That was the first thing. The second thing that was a real miss for me is that I did not seek out women mentors and women sponsors. While the industry is very male dominated, I literally thought that the men could get me where I needed to go What I didn't realize is that while they were raising, so to speak, a great professional, there were things about my womanhood that they simply could not address for me or with me. And so I would have been much more intentional early on about connecting with women mentors and not relying so much on the men who were volunteering, so to speak, and doing well-intentioned work. But there's just a space that you need to have as a professional woman to have that a real tribe around you to grow in leadership.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, for me personally, I think it's two things. One, I think it's easy earlier on in your career to stay in an execution space, and you can execute for as long as you want. But if you're not influencing, then you are missing out on a core component of leadership. So I wish that was something I kind of caught onto a little bit earlier, but then again, not that many people talk about it. The second thing that I think there's a difference between how we've traditionally spoken about leadership, you know, being the one who sets a direction and gives tasks and assigns projects, which can at times, I think, be very transactional. It can be that way. Of course, it doesn't have to be that way. But I wish that I had really understood the power of coaching and asking the right questions, because that can be a lot more transformational. So now when I'm having conversations with people on my team, I'm a lot more focused on unlocking those aha moments and kind of pulling out insights from them, as opposed to always telling them what to do or how I want them to do things.
Gosh, Gabriella raises a fantastic point when she said you can execute forever, but flipping the switch from focus on execution to influence, and knowing that influence can't be built externally. Like to build currency, social currency that allows you to move up the ladder, you have to have influence. And having influence means focusing on results as it relates to strategic business objectives.
Yes.
Maybe your role is not in the area that focuses on strategic business objectives. Just because these roles and responsibilities are important for a business unit does not mean that they align with strategic business objectives. So always having that ask, oh my gosh, how is my role and responsibility aligning with strategic business objectives? And if I'm not in a role today that is aligned, then how do I move into a role, even if that's a lateral move, because that building of influence is actually what's going to help you to get to that next level.
That gives me a thought, actually, because, I've been a technology leader for a long time. And I think maybe something I really needed to realize was stepping up to business leadership is an important stage and requires the next stage of skills from technology leadership. It's a big switch.
Yeah, I think for most people, technology should be like what I can't say hanging fruit, but if you're looking at where strategy is,
yes,
digital leadership is where you should be spending your time. In my transition from corporate America, I noticed that that's a gap for me. I spent a lot of time in the logistics industry, which is not exactly known as digital leaders, and then coming out and wanting to pivot and work with Google and Facebook and LinkedIn, these large technology companies. I noticed that I had no vocabulary around digital transformation. I had zero vocabulary awareness around, like, well, I don't know. I helped onboard a CRM. That's it.
Speaking of qualities, and speaking of qualities or where we might have a gap, I mean, please be honest. What qualities do you think are lacking among today's leaders? It's also a question from the audience, and I think it fits really well right now.
Conversation, the ability to have creative conversations are very challenging. Empathic listening. Listening is not a soft skill. Every time someone says listening is a soft skill, it just makes the hair on my neck raise, because it's one of the hardest things you can do, is to actually be a great listener. And most people can only name like one or two in their entire lives who are great listeners. And so I think that skill of listening and being able to listen with your whole self is something we have to build the bandwidth for as leaders. And we have to work on it as if it's as important as an MBA.
That is such a great point. I compulsively take notes, which is so easy in the remote world and is so hard in person. I watched that documentary about the memory palace, and it makes me think I really got to practice my memory because I forget people's names in a cocktail party or whatever. Oh, it's tough. Right now, I could be taking notes right now.
But
Yeah, you
how do
definitely-
you, sorry, Gabby, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was going to say you definitely hit on one that comes up a lot, which is about more emotional intelligence. And I think the good thing is people are really tuning into the importance of that now. I think also agility is important because our context is growing more and more chaotic and more different, especially with the transition to remote work, able to kind of adjust from doing one thing one moment to doing a different project the next moment is important. And there is like a shift in thinking that has to take place there. And then I don't know how to put this into words exactly, but I think what I'm observing, at least, especially with remote work, is everything seems to be faster because I think there's like more messages and people are more tuned in to their computers because perhaps during COVID they had a little bit they didn't have the space of going to the office and such. And so I think it's really important now to just hold space for people and really connect authentically and focus on slowing down.
Yes.
And I work with another coach, Renita Calhorn, and she always says, slow down to speed up. And I love that phrase because I think that's super important. We can do with slowing down.
I had heard once
Gabriella,
that
may I ask a follow-up question? You mentioned agility as a skill. How would you envision an organization practicing agility?
Oh,
that's a good question. Well, I can talk about it a little bit at Bunch. So I used to work at Accenture, which is 400,000 people. And then when I transferred to Bunch, it was very different because Bunch is only 13 people. So one thing that we focus on a lot is like building MVPs. So, iterating, really getting feedback from your users and your hot core users, like the people who are really important, the people you're really building for, iterating. So I've never worked in such a fast environment, but I think that that's one way that agility comes into play. And I also think that agility has been a big conversation during COVID because when people were going remote overnight, that takes so much agility. So it's kind of like what are the core like resources or things that you go to when something like that happens, and really focusing on that. And I saw some people in my coaching sessions do it really well. Other people, we're still learning. So
I think there's macro level agility where a whole company, and we've been helping companies suddenly go remote when they were all sort of in stores, point of sale things, so that people can log in to buy things, right? That's macro level, and leaders need to help their companies achieve that. But then there's also micro level, and I love the idea of making space. And in a previous session we were talking a little bit about that. Allowing for ambient interactions that you used to have in the hallways and the kitchens and whatnot. I hear there's a kitchen Slack channel in Female Factor. And I totally get that. You need that ambient time. And I had heard once that, a leader's job is to be interrupted, right? And well, to be interruptible, you need to not have your day blocked out for 8-10 hours a day. Well, people's time is more meetinged up now, and it's not right. And I try and make time to be interruptible because I think it's important. So I think that's part of what we need to do, and that's part of being agile, is to have time to be interrupted, to do something else. Your day needs
to take the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
In my previous role as a sales leader, especially when the pandemic happened, I used to go in and I thought about how it was when I was doing my MBA program, where the teacher would have open hours, the faculty would have open hours. So I started scheduling on my calendar open house. That just
exactly
put it to my calendar during that time. I'm available. If you call me, I'm going to, answer the phone. You won't be challenged by meetings. And I would schedule 3 hours a week of open house so that we created space for that type of dialogue.
That's something we instituted when I sort of built my new team this year, was twice weekly. We have this hour and we call them CTO lounges, and anybody at the company is allowed to come, and we set a theme weekly and we discuss things, and it's kind of an innovation brainstorming couple of hours, and we've generated all kinds of new thoughts and ideas, if you will.
I think one other way that you could exercise or put agility to practice that's standing out for me, because I wouldn't have thought of it in those terms, but I've done 2-week sprints in the past. And if I start thinking about agility in practice, I think 2-week sprints are a great way to do that, because you're setting goals, you're setting promises that directly align with business objectives, but you're checking in and making adjustments based on what was successful, what wasn't successful, what landed, what didn't land, what additional support's needed. So if someone's thinking about Gabriella's context around agility, that skill, and how to put that in practice, then one simple way to do that is to consider working on 2-week sprints.
Absolutely.
That's a very good point, actually. You know what I would also be curious to know is, because we at the Female Factor usually work with the next generation of leaders, so mostly millennials, female millennials, and they are right now maybe at mid-level management and really trying to jump to the next level. What do you think, and that's also a question that got a couple votes in the Q&A session, what are some of the challenges that you see that today's younger generation is facing in terms of becoming a future leader, and what tip would you give them?
So one of the challenges is also one of the opportunities, I think, is the challenge is there is a lot of noise around DEI. Some companies are invested in truly bringing DEI to life. Other companies are invested in talking about bringing DEI to life. And those companies that are talking about it and creating noise around it are companies that are going to put women in roles that they're not prepared for. They're going to get in the roles and not have the proper support for it. And so I'd be on the lookout if I am in an organization that is truly living and doing the work around DEI, or am I about to be a pawn and or a token in a situation? That is a real challenge, because it creates context that makes it more difficult for the next woman coming into that role, right? So that's what I think is a real challenge that women have to be mindful of, is I want this, and I want you to want it, but make sure that you're doing it in an organization with an organization that really culturally is preparing to make a big promise and to meet that big promise.
Interesting. Eve?
I would suggest, in the thinking about the list of things that I look for in nascent leaders, in leaders to be, embodying those and practicing those skills is the best thing, because you start to shine like a beacon. People will want to be you and want you and emulate you if you do those things and practice those things. And they're good, solid leadership skills, like, don't gossip, discourage gossip. There's something that I've been really advocating in my team, which is a little thing called, be the change you want to see in the world. Which is, not everything has to be a project that you bring to somebody else to go build. Go and do the thing, right? It can be actionable all by yourself. Be the directly responsible individual for something that you see that needs change. Those are really great leadership qualities. And don't curse the darkness. There's times when I've been like this. Light a single candle. These are great qualities that make people want to follow you around like little ducklings.
Those are great points, Eve.
Those are really great points. Gabby, what would you say from a leadership coach's perspective? Also, I'd be curious, have a leadership coach?
I don't currently.
I don't currently.
Okay.
Okay. So I have a spiritual coach. Yeah, I have someone I work with. But I think every coach kind of needs a coach too. But that's a good question. So to answer your question, I definitely resonate a lot with what Roquita said. And I think that one of the challenges that I see a lot is I think people are very critical of themselves nowadays. And I believe this is partly because of social media, honestly, and just always on having so much information and always comparing themselves to other people. You know, this is something I see a lot in coaching. And, you know, I have mixed feelings about the term imposter syndrome, but it comes up a lot. You know, people feel very uncomfortable when they are faced with these moments of growth. And one thing I always do in holding space for them is telling them, this is completely normal. And if you don't feel that way, it actually means you're not growing. So it's a good thing. So I think that if I were kind of going back a few years looking for my next position or leadership role, I would really look for an organization that has like mentorship in place. And I think especially for females, it's important to have the support groups. It's important to have employee resource groups, really having a dedicated space to discuss your challenges and whatever roadblocks you're facing. Because if you don't have that, it's just too easy to go from meeting to meeting. And before you know it, 8 months has passed and you haven't told anybody about how you're feeling inside. And then the feelings of imposter syndrome just get deeper and deeper. So I would look for an organization that really invests in their female leadership, but at every level, the organizational level, so making commitments, but also at the employee level so that we can all build each other and support each other.
That's beautiful. We strongly believe in mentorship programs. That's why we at the Female Factor also run our own mentorship program across industries and countries. And we've really seen an incredible impact on women's careers through mentorship. I'm afraid our time is coming up, so I would like to ask the last question. So what is your number one advice or last call to action for HR leaders and decision makers on how they can develop the next generation of female leaders?
Yeah, so my call of action is twofold. A, make sure that you are engaging with sales organizations around inclusive culture and skills that need to be developed for inclusive culture and not just representation, right? And not leaving it to sales leaders to develop. That should be an engagement, and HR has a unique opportunity to be a true partner with sales leaders in order to make sure that those skills that build inclusive culture are happening. The second thing is, I'd like to see organizations that don't have representation or keynotes just at Women's History Month or just at Black History Month, that they're ensuring that we're having these talks and having this dialogue around diversity year round. I don't want to get 100 calls in February. I like to get my call. I like to get keynote calls throughout the year.
Feel you on that one.
Exactly. So it's not just Women's Month. It's not just Black History Month or some theme. How about making a commitment to diversity year round?
That's great.
That's a statement. Thank you.
Maybe I'll offer one last thing. What we talked about regarding feedback, I think, is so critical, you know, and we in my organization have been really affected by reading the recent Netflix book, The No Rules Rules, where they sort of have a framework around feedback. And we've, at least in my team, we've been talking a lot about that framework and sort of adding a sort of plus on top of it. And they have these 4 A's, you know, aim to assist, make it actionable. Person hearing it should appreciate the feedback and it can accept it or discard it. In addition, you know, I've been saying, you know, it should be, they add this too, offer it in good faith, and use the principle of charitable interpretation when you're hearing it, right? And they do talk about, I mentioned, don't gossip. You can discourage gossip by turning it around and saying, you know, what did they say when you told them that? Don't accept gossip either. That's one of those ways you can be the change you want to see in the world. Individually, you can stop it in its tracks. That's the way you can encourage by yourself a healthier culture and the value of valuable feedback. You can do this.
Beautiful. Thank you, Eve.
Yes.
Action.
So what I would say, I'm coming from an HR standpoint as someone who's done these programs in the past. I think it's really important to make sure that you have support at every level of the organization. So organizational level, team level, manager level, and then also the employee level. And if you don't have all of those, then something's missing, because there will be a time when somebody needs that. So from an HR standpoint, I would really focus on that. The other thing I would say is put your money where your mouth is. If you want more female leaders in your organization, you better give them the incentive to grow and thrive in your organization. And one really good book that I just started reading recently is called Ladies Get Paid by Claire Wasserman. I'd really advise everybody to read it because it's awesome, and so many aha moments that I wish I knew when I had started my career.
Great. We'll add that to the book club at the Female Factor and post the link here as well. Thank you, ladies, so much. Our time is up. Thank you so much for the wisdom nuggets, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.